Hi, everybody. We're having fun in the chat. um, Welcome. My name's Jamie. I'm the Director of Operations at Women and Children First. On this hot, hot day everywhere, I hope that you're somewhere with a cold beverage and you're here to help me welcome Jordan Calhoun in conversation with Britteney Black Rose Kapri in celebration of Jordan's book, Piccolo is Black. We begin our virtual events as we begin our events in the store with the land acknowledgement. Please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the occupied and unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. There are over 75,000 Indigenous people living in Illinois, and we strive to recognize and honor Native history, literature, and community while striving to go beyond words by uplifting Native movements. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. As we start to navigate what the future with COVID will look like, our bookstore is open for browsing. You still have to wear a mask. You can also support us through our online store. We continue to offer curbside pickup and we ship to anywhere in the US. We're dipping our toes into in-store events, but many events will continue to be held virtually. So please check our events calendar out on our website to see what's coming up, including an in-person event with Ruth Ozeki this Friday. Some logistical podcast information you might need to know. During the event, if you have a question for either Jordan or Britteney, you can use the Ask a Question box located at the bottom of your screen, and you can utilize the chat bar, which is already happening, on the side of the screen to talk to one another. You can also buy a copy of Piccolo is Black by clicking the buy a book box right below in the middle of the screen. With that housekeeping out of the way, let's turn our attention to our authors. Jordan Calhoun lives in New York City. He's the editor-in-chief at Lifehacker, publishes a weekly newsletter called Humans Being for The Atlantic, and regularly contributes to Black Nerd Problems. His writing has appeared in the Huffington Post and Vulture, and Piccolo is Black, a memoir of race, religion, and pop culture is his debut memoir. I can't say that word. In it, he explores the ways that pop culture and childhood entertainment form our identities, and the book is an honest and funny celebration of Black identity in America. Jordan is joined by Britteney, sorry about that, Black Rose Kapri, a teaching artist, writer, performance poet, and playwright from Chicago, who is about as far from this store as I am, but in the opposite direction, we determined. She has been published in Poetry Magazine, Vinyl, and Kinfolk's Quarterly, just to name a few, and her debut book, Black Queer Hoe, has become a staple on our shelves since its publication in 2018. So thanks again so much, and now I'll turn the virtual stage over to Jordan Calhoun and Britteney Kapri.
Thank you. Before we get in conversation,
let me get out the chat. I'm just.
Before we get in conversation, I actually think it's important to hear from you, particularly on page 61. You sort of do a breakdown of what it's like blackwashing characters. And I think it's important to have that conversation for people who didn't have to seek out representation, and just a pretty good introduction to the experience of the book. So
Gladly. All right, I'll start at the bottom of page 61 and go into page 62. And this is from the first part of Piccolo is Black, Memoir of Race, Religion, and Pop Culture. As I learned to implicitly assign race to fictional characters, I was unaware of the same ability, that part of an uncanny commonality amongst non-white kids who grew up without diverse representation, to automatically assign race to characters for whom race wasn't prescribed. It was a process that ran in my subconscious, scanning the menu of characters for the Black one. White kids were being taught not to see race, and I was learning the exact opposite. Black-coded characters fell into three categories. First are the racially ambiguous or unhuman colored characters, like Captain Planet's Gaia. With brown or blue-tinted skin, I claimed these characters the moment they showed a familiar feature of the Black experience within a predominantly white culture. They're often one of few characters with their complexion, sometimes the Black best friend archetype, or token Black, like Disney's Doug's best friend, Skeeter. The second category is the anthropomorphic animals, who are human-like, but not so much as to have an explicit race, leaving them up for grabs for the kids in front of the TV screen. Elmo, Goliath, Ursula, Panthro, Goofy, Max, Scrappy-Doo, Lola Bunny, both SWAT cats, Knuckles, and every Maximal in Beast Wars was black. Most black-coded characters fell into this category. The third category is made up of aliens like Optimus Prime, Martian Manhunter, Moto from Biker Mice from Mars, Alf, Worf, Martian the Manhunter, and, of course, Piccolo. Any familiar feature of black culture would make these characters an addition to my team of heroes, misfits, and friends who would help me see myself on screen. One of those features was a traumatic history, like their planet being destroyed and their kind being rejected by the new society where the characters found themselves as strangers. They were the Piccolos and the Martian Manhunters, refugees with hearts of gold despite their painful past. They were often exploited and treated poorly, but were written to respond with a code of honor above those around them. Another identifying feature was a stubborn pride in the face of a dominant culture. Trapped as outsiders within a culture that believed or behaved one way, the black-coded characters challenged that culture with an unabashed confidence in who they were. These were the Ursulas and the Dinobots, those who saw their own value, dominant culture be damned. They shook off their rejection and lived as they were, more likely to lure others into their way of thinking than to abandon their sense of self to fit in. I'll stop there.
Very nice. Very nice. I have Blanco from Space Jam tattooed to my arm. The Monstars are black. They had to work for free for that rich guy, and they stole their freedom. So I definitely have one of my favorite black-coded characters tattooed.
Love it. Got it tatted on the arm forever.
Got you. I mean, I'm a walking thing of pop culture.
I know.
I have all of my favorite. I'm about 55, I think.
Beautiful.
Are you tattooless?
I'm still tattooless.
Is it because of Jesus?
Thing. I can't. I live tattoos. I live vicariously through other people. I love seeing other people get tattoos. I love sleeves, but I would not get a sleeve myself, or at least I don't think I will. So I love seeing other people's ideas for tattoos and what they end up getting. I love hearing whatever new tattoo you got. I am always here to cheer you on, but I have yet to get one myself.
Have you thought about getting tattoos?
That's the thing, is I don't know what I would get if I were to get a tattoo. I don't know what would be. I think I set the bar too high in terms of what is how important it needs to be to me to get a tattoo. And if I were to lower that standard, then I would probably just get I could get a tattoo montage of literally every character that I just named who was coded black, and it would have meaning and it would be important. My only fear with getting a tattoo is always the permanence of it. It's what if I change my mind later on about something? What if I coded, Patty Mayonnaise as black before, and then I was I don't know, maybe she's not. Maybe I heard some shit about Patty.
Oh my God, I have 3 Harry Potter tattoos.
How do you feel about that? You just gotta roll with it.
Just because she's terrible, that has nothing to do with that. Harry Potter literally got me through depression, the escapism. I needed Harry Potter when I was in middle school, when I was in high school, and just because she's a white womaning has nothing to do with the impact it had on my childhood. And that's what tattoos mean for me. And you can't separate the art from the artist when they're terrible. Do I ever want to contribute to the Harry Potter video game come out? Do I want to put money back in J.K. Rowling's pocket? No. But do I have this dark mark title tattooed on me? Hell yes, because people need to know when they meet me that I'm a villain, and I'm wearing it proud.
And a lot of those characters, man. I mean, a lot of the book is the foundation of the book is based on the idea that obviously representation matters, but also these characters mattered in helping me form my identity the same way that they helped, I imagine, you and a lot of other people. They were the mirrors that we use to try to see parts of ourselves and to feel powerful and to feel special and to feel smart and all those things. So yeah, I totally hear you. Totally agree.
Okay. Hard-hitting questions right now.
Yeah, let's get into the hard-hitting questions. And feel free for those in the chat, if you have questions, you don't even have to wait for the Q&A. I'm actually scrolling up right now. I see Carrie, one of my old Peace Corps friends, saying "Zdravo, Jordan." So "Zdravo" back to Carrie. Holler in the chat, man. Have fun interacting with us. This does not need to be stuffy at all. We are happy to respond to questions on the fly. But yeah, B.
I'm a former high school teacher, so
we haven't
I just
gotten
really want to like. we haven't gotten to hang out. I don't go outside. I don't trust the outside places. And you've been traveling a lot. Like every time I look up, you're like overseas. Like, it's really dope.
Yeah. I've done so. Most recently, it's been local travel for the book. I literally just got back a couple hours ago from DC. I was at Politics and Prose bookstore doing a book event for Piccolo is Black. This is the one that I was looking forward to though, because it's like it's a different experience when I'm having a book event with someone who I know personally and comfortably, and we can just talk the way that we normally talk. You can ask like the off the wall questions that.
I have one queued up. Don't worry.
Yeah, see, and that's what I like, man. That's what I enjoy. So I just got back from DC, and this is something I've been looking forward to.
Yeah, if you guys came to this event expecting to hear questions like what inspires you to write, as somebody who published a book in 2018 and has had to answer that question, how many times that you're not going to hear that you're not going to hear that shit. Hard hitting questions. Who's harder to deal with online? Anime fans, hip hop fans, or Jesus stans?
Harder to deal with online, I would say anime fans. I'm going to say anime fans. Yeah, I'm going to say, and I can give an explanation for how I approach sort of online debates or arguments or discourse or whatever, and why anime fans would be worse for me. So when it comes to, I'll work backwards. When it comes to people who are still very deeply in the religion that I was raised in, I am able to, or at least I think I am able to connect with them on a sense of empathy and understanding where they're coming from. And even if they have a belief system or they see things in a perspective that I don't see anymore, I have a deeper appreciation and understanding on where they get those beliefs and what it does for them that's good. And I'm usually able, depending on what the topic is, to like work around that framework to still have a constructive conversation with them. So I'm able to engage with someone who's like a hardcore, Christian. I'm still able to engage with them pretty effectively because I can speak their language. Hip hop fans, I don't bother arguing with them because it's like it's so subjective that I feel like any conversation about like top 5 and all that stuff, it's just like I don't think of it in the context of best anymore. I'm just like, this is your favorite, and you can have whatever favorite you want. Your favorite could be French Montana and Big Sean.
Don't say that. I knew you were gonna.
It
can't be, but I hear you.
Yeah, like.
I'll be good like, argument.
Like, no, they have this, and I won't even get worked up about it. I'll just feel sympathy. I'm like, well, this is how you feel, and you don't know better. Like, I'm sorry.
Bless his heart.
Yeah, exactly. You feel sort of like, oh, my sweet summer child. This is what you think is good. That's fine. I am, I hope for a better future for you. I hope that you end up listening to something better. But when it comes to anime fans, the things that are insufferable are just the types of arguments that people will make that usually I think most arguments about anime on social media are things that I don't think are worthy or even possible to argue about. For example, and this is, I guess maybe a hot take, but one of my least favorite questions when people are taking it seriously. It's one thing to like do it frivolously, but when people are taking it seriously, one of my least favorite questions is who would win in a fight between so and so and so and so. And my approach to that, the reason I don't care about it so much is because people will really argue as if these are real people, like as if these exist outside of the context of the fighter.
Are you talking about Dragon Ball Z fans?
Yeah, like Dragon Ball Z fans who are talking like, can Goku be Or can Goku beat Sailor Moon in a fight? Or can Goku beat anybody in a fight? It's like, Goku's not real, bro. Like that only, that conversation can only really make sense for me if you're putting it in the context of a larger story. Because in a fight, usually it's the narrative around the characters that's going to inform who's going to win. So if you take the narrative part out of it and you're just saying this real person versus this real person in a fight, it's like, these aren't real people. So it's very hard to do that without knowing what their motivations would be in that story, what it is that they're fighting for, what rules they're fighting by.
Do you mean like the Superman Flash crossover where they hit the race? Like Goku shows up in Sailor Moon world and the Sailor Moon being the main character, right? Because you entered their world.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are they fighting for? What world are they in? There's so much narrative stuff that informs the answer to that question. But generally speaking, we're not including the narrative stuff when we have those debates. So I'm like, the bullshit answer that I would give to who would win between this person and this person, this like fictional character, my answer is like, who's writing it? Like, I can make Squirrel Girl beat Superman, depending on who the writer is and what the context is.
Okay, well, my final question literally says Goku or Jesus. So
which I can give an answer to that, or at least I can ask. Does Jesus have God on his side, or is he doing it solo dolo? Like, is God helping him?
No, I didn't write Goku or God. Like I knew. I think I knew what that answer was.
I mean, Pharisees took down Jesus. Jesus wasn't hard to take down. The same people that praised Jesus with palm branches in a parade, they took him down with just a little bit of manipulation. It wasn't even great manipulation either. It wasn't like Game of Thrones level, like intrigue and
this is my Game of Thrones shit.
It didn't take a lot to take. Man, somebody look in the Bible and see how much Judas sold out Jesus for. It wasn't even like, was it silver? It wasn't even gold. It wasn't like Jesus,
which makes me think about one of my greatest stories in history, is when Julius Caesar got kidnapped and I forget how much they demanded for him, and he was like, "Nah, that's not enough.
Yeah, like that's
$1 million. Like, do you know who I am?
Like how dare 30 pieces of silver, man? Like, you just got to prices for inflation. Like, that's not a lot for a life. Like today in New York, if you wanted to get somebody murdered, it would cost like 5 stacks. Like, your average person getting murdered costs more than what the cost of Jesus was back in the day. Like, taking down Jesus was not too hard. So Goku would definitely win that one. No, actually, it wouldn't even take Goku. Krillin would take down. It wouldn't take much.
This is really not where I thought this was going, but this is so.
Hercule would have taken down. Like, it wouldn't take much. I'm sorry.
Okay,
like,
you're okay. So I need to go on record and say you're naming characters from the show, but I've never watched Dragon Ball Z because Dragon Ball Z to me is like the J. Cole of anime, and that everyone who engages with Dragon Ball Z is insufferable and has made me completely 100% uninterested.
I completely understand it, man. Some fandoms can really, I mean, it's sad, but some fandoms can really turn you off to things that you would otherwise like. And it's partially by design. Like, that's what they want. I think like there's so much. Anytime that there's gatekeeping involved in the nerd community, the goal of that gatekeeping is for those people who felt in control of that space to try to hold on and not cede any ground to that space. They want to be kings of their small little castle, and that's what especially now when nerddom isn't what it used to be. Before, being a nerd meant like it was being into anything that was quirky and niche. It was being into comics. It was being into anime. It was being into Dungeons and Dragons. But those type of things aren't nerdy anymore. They're pop culture. Like,
pop culture.
Watching a Marvel movie isn't nerdy anymore. Everyone watches Marvel movies. Knowing what a Demogorgon is isn't nerdy.
You're actually really judged if you haven't seen.
Yeah, exactly. Like, all of these things that used to be identifiers of someone who was nerdy is now mainstream. Like, the number one thing on Netflix is Stranger Things, and everyone knows what a Demogorgon is and all that stuff. Like, knowing what a Pokemon isn't considered super nerdy anymore. Knowing, a mainstream anime isn't super nerdy anymore. So what happens then is that those people who used to feel special for being a nerd, they used to be, they used to reign over their space as a nerd. Now they feel like they've lost some ground to those people who, to everyone, because everyone all of a sudden knows these things. So in order to feel like powerful again, in order to feel special in their space, they try to be insufferable. They try to say like, oh, you don't know, Goku's nephew's cousin's birthday, like you don't know whatever. And then they're like, that's when they're insufferable, to the point of someone like you being like, I don't even want to deal with this anymore. Y'all suck. And I get it. I get why you or anyone else would make that decision. It just makes me sad to hear it. Not specifically for Dragon Ball Z. You watch plenty of anime that is better than Dragon Ball Z, to be honest. But it makes me sad that the idea that gatekeepers can be successful. Like I absolutely hate gatekeeping in the nerd space, and I hate the extent to which they can be successful at turning people off from things that they would be joyful fans of.
So when I am new to anime, right? Like I started
I don't even know if you're new.
around the I mean, I feel that way when I'm like having conversations with people who are like, yeah, I used to watch this on YouTube in 3 parts over a span of 70 hours. No, thank you. If I had tried to get into anime when I was younger, how the things panned out, I wouldn't have been able to. But I remember talking to you when I first got into it, and I just like flat out asked you, I was like, how do you deal with, like, I was watching Promised Neverland, and I could not get past the way that woman is drawn. Like, I was like, this is a mammy. I don't care what anybody says. This is a mammy. Like, and I was like, she's bigger, she's meaner, she's drawn. And I was like, there's a bunch of things that like I've realized, like getting into anime and getting into like gaming, that I have to put things in like boxes so that I can like deal with it. Like I play Fortnite, and so like when I got myself into like online gaming, I had to be like, I am going to hear some things that are going to anger me, and I just cannot live in anger, because I really enjoy this game, because I really enjoy, anime. But the rampant sexual assault, the racism, all of it, like how do you compartmentalize like the trauma of experiencing pop culture?
So there's so much of it, and I think of it as the flip side of the coin to racial coding. Like, so to explain racial coding, I mean, I already read the passage from the book, but to add some more context to it, animation, when it started, let's say early in the 40s, 50s, 60s, animation was extremely racist. If you saw depictions of Black people in early Disney or in early Warner Brothers, there was a lot of just what we would look at today as horribly terrible racist depictions. And today, obviously, that has shifted. We're in a better place. It's not perfect, but we're definitely in a better place. And in the 80s and 90s was the segue. That was the bridge from the super racist, like Censored 11, feel free to look that up, or I describe it in my book, from like the early Censored 11 days of Black depictions to today. The 80s and 90s were that segue. And what happened in the 80s and 90s is that there weren't as many blatantly racist depictions. There just weren't many depictions of people of color at all. And for people like me, for kids like me growing up, we ended up learning this implicit skill of racial coding, like being able to see Black characters where Black characters may or may not have been intended. So certain characters that were, blue or aliens or had a certain experience, we're like, oh, that's clearly the Black character. It would like fit into the archetype of the Black experience in a way that we were familiar with. So that character would be the one that we would tie ourselves to and say, like, this is my favorite character because this is the one that represents me, right? So that exists, that sort of skill set to be able to identify and latch on to those characters. But there's also the flip of that is true, that, and I think that it still happens today, and it's partially, or not partially, it's definitely what you just described, B, is that we were able to recognize Black coded characters, but we're also able to see those characters that were shitty depictions of Black people and just filter it out. Be like, oh, that's not for me. Like that is like if you're watching Dragon Ball Z, for example, and you see this character named Mr. Popo, you're just like, oh, that's not my favorite character. That's not. We're just gonna ignore that. We're gonna keep it moving. Or if you're watching Finding Neverland, if you're watching any of these shows where there's like a depiction that has a certain type of drawing or the character is depicted a certain type of way, and there's so much of it even today in anime, as the defense mechanism, we sort of filter it out in order to enjoy the thing that we're trying to enjoy, and we sort of pretend like it's not there to the extent possible. And it's much like the need for racial coding or the ability that we learn to racially code things when we were younger. It's sort of a good and a bad. Like it's a bad thing, but it's also a celebratory thing. And I can explain that really briefly. It's like on the one hand, it's very, 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 very terrible and shitty that we had such low representation or such poor representation, or both low and poor representation, that we had to make this adaptation to feel seen and to feel special and to feel powerful. Like that's bad that context existed for us to have to develop that skill. But on the good side, we were able to develop that skill, and that's pretty awesome that we were able to
But I think that just applies to like all of Black culture, like
yes.
all things everything that we celebrate,
exactly,
and that we love, stems from
being adaptable and being able to make like, oh, if you are going to give us the scraps of this food, then we are going to be able to try to make fine cuisine out of it, and it's going to be something that becomes important to us and part of our culture and something that's worth celebrating. So there's like, you could look at it from the bad sense, and you can also see the thing to celebrate in that. I think the same thing is true for being able to filter out the shitty depictions that we see in anime in this example, is that there are really shitty examples, and that's obviously terrible whenever we see characters that are like, ooh, you should not get away with this. You should not be able to get away with this, writing this character this way and illustrating them this way. But it's also, I mean, I am very impressed. I have never-ending admiration and respect for the Black nerd community's ability to like, we made, especially in the United States, particularly in the United States, like we made anime popular. Like we did very well at making anime popular.
What did we make popular?
Yeah, very true. And anime is one of those things. And one of the ways that we were able to do that is be like, listen, these are the things that we love. This is a part of it that we don't love. We're going to set that aside. We're not even going to acknowledge it. That's obviously trash, and it should speak for itself as trash. And let's focus on those things that we do love. And hopefully, as we continue to embrace animation and anime, like we will have bigger roles to play in creating it and having a voice in how some of these drawings are done and how some of these stories are written, so that there's less of that in the future. I think anime is lagging a little bit behind in what we generally think of in terms of American animation and their depictions of Black people, obviously because Black people have a bigger voice and bigger impact in the United States culturally than Black people do in Japan. Yeah, I lived in Japan for a year, and there was a lot of that where I just, looked the other way.
Do Black people love the Gucci print more or the Akatsuki print more?
I'm gonna say Akatsuki. That Akatsuki print is fire.
Keith asked in the chat, does it make you happy to see shows like Craig of the Creek blatantly featuring prominent Black characters?
Absolutely, of course. And that's the end goal. When I think of the trajectory of diversity and representation, particularly for Black people, obviously it started in a very, very terrible, openly racist place, and animation has evolved, and now we are where we are today. And it's not just trying. We've made a lot of progress in having more Black characters on screen. not just in animation, but in TV, in storytelling in general, there's a lot more Black representation in the past, few decades. The next sort of the bigger step to take beyond that is having that representation written by people of color, like having people of color not just on the screen or in front of the camera, but behind the camera and in the writers' rooms and in those places of being able to tell stories rather than white people being in all the decision-making rooms
and the voice actors.
And the voice actors as well. Like having those opportunities to be able to tell stories is absolutely great. In the meantime, while we're growing those numbers of people who are telling stories, shows like Craig of the Creek are absolutely amazing. I absolutely love them.
So we talk a lot about representation in like pop culture, but I wonder, did you feel represented in like Christian media, right? Like, because obviously at the start of this, like your experience in Christianity was very Black, and then you transferred schools, and then you had to take a step back and realize that your Black experience is like still as like your Black Christian experience is still a sub genre, right? Like it's not the main thing. And so like when you consume Christian media as a kid, did you feel represented in that way, or did race not like
definitely not. And that could be in two ways. One of them would have been by nature of during that time period, Black characters just not being so I talk about this in the book, how there's a common ratio of like 1 to 5. There would be one Black person for every 5 non-Black people. So you could think about this in the context. The easiest context is like any show like Power Rangers, where it'd be a team of 5. You would have a team of 5. One of them would be Black, and then maybe one of them would be Asian. And it would be the same thing for, Tattoo
Captain Planet.
There's from Beverly Hills, Captain Planet, VR Troopers, any of those things. The common ratio would be 1 to 5. Every now and then on animated Christian shows, well, actually, no. That also applied to animated Christian shows. That ratio would be about the same. One of the examples that I talk about in the book is Greatest Adventures Stories from the Bible, which was this Hanna-Barbera cartoon that ran several episodes. Basically, these 3 characters would go back in time and relive Bible stories like as if they were happening today. And those characters were Margot, Derek, and Moki. Margot and Derek were white. They were 2 archaeologists. And then they had a third friend who wasn't an archaeologist, but he would just sort of tag along, and he was their Black friend, Moki. And he was sort of the class clown. And Moki was my favorite character because he was the Black character, and that was like, it was just sort of by default. But broadly speaking, did I feel represented? Did I feel like there were many options when I was watching Greatest Adventure Stories from the Bible or Veggie Tales? Were there characters that I would code Black and Veggie Tales? No, not really. What else was there? Adventures in Odyssey, like all of these things that I grew up on, Jungle Jam and Friends, all this Christian entertainment. There wasn't much diverse representation. That wasn't top of mind at all. So there was that reason that I didn't feel much representation there. But then it was also by nature of the denomination that I was raised in. I was raised Seventh-day Adventist, and there wasn't that much like representation of Seventh-day Adventists in culture, period. Like there were certain, it was such that I knew that being raised, even as a kid, I knew that being raised Seventh-day Adventist was weird, that it wasn't a common thing, that if I told someone I was Seventh-day Adventist, they would ask what it is rather than having an understanding of it by default. Like if you told someone you're Catholic or you're Lutheran, they're not going to be like, what's a Catholic? Like they're going to have a cultural understanding, at least like a lowest common denominator, fundamental, foundational understanding of what that is. Whereas most people didn't have that with Seventh-day Adventists. So you get used to either giving an explanation and sort of semi-proselytizing and explaining that the seventh day is the Sabbath and that's what you believe and why you go to church on the Sabbath and why everyone else is wrong for going to church on Sunday. Or you do what me and my brother did, which was not talk about it in mixed company. Like we were raised Adventists, but we would only talk about our Adventism with other Adventists. And when we were outside of that, we wouldn't bring it up at all. And that same thing, that same expectation of assuming that the audience, assuming that the person that we're talking to is not interested in Seventh-day Adventism and doesn't know what it is, that same thing was true with my relationship with the media I was consuming. I assume that they're like characters being written are not going to church on Saturday, even if they're Christian characters. These characters are Episcopalian or Lutheran or Catholic or whatever.
I didn't even think about it that way yet. Like even the representation of Christianity at large was still not the Christianity that you were experiencing. And
mine was not a mainstream Christianity.
And there's like a thing where, and particularly like people online is like, oh my God, you have so many Black characters, right? And it's like already like, how could you guys not feel? And it's like, there's a difference between like somebody being like drawn Black and somebody being Black. Oh God, someone's at my door. Somebody being drawn Black and somebody being Black, right? Like when you watch a horror film and there's one Black friend and they're out in the woods with people, you're like, what are you doing there? The whole time you're like, I would never be there in that situation. And it's like, just because they hired a Black actress for this does not mean this is a Black character, because this is not a Black experience.
Right.
My mother would never I really enjoy really enjoy like thrillers and shit, because I'm just like, this is crazy, because like the people like the what ifs, I wouldn't be in the situation, because my mother would not have allowed me to come here from the jump. And I'm not lying to my mom and like going on spring break.
Yeah.
Like what?
And I think a lot of that authenticity that you would be looking for in that context really comes when there are more people of color. Oh, Bea is still there. She just turned off her camera real quick. Someone's at her door, but I'll keep talking about this for the audience. That authenticity comes when people are behind the camera or in the writer's room or in a decision-making place to be able to inform those stories written. And that's when you get, that's the rise of own voices stories. And that's when you get things that feel more authentic from the Black experience or from the experience of whoever's writing from a marginalized community. Having that person, having those people tell different stories, that's so important rather than just having them on the screen. And then it's important to have enough of those people creating stories so that it's not, so that the weight of the Black experience isn't on one person or on a small number of people, because that's more than any one person can carry. And then what happens when you don't like that thing? What happens when that thing is not very good? You end up in sort of, I was having this conversation at a book event in Philly where we were talking about, and I'll just be real candid, we were talking about LaShawn Thomas and some of his anime. I don't know if you ever watched Yosuke on Netflix or Cannon Busters.
Yeah, as soon as I realized Yosuke was going to be a fantasy thing where he still had to endure a shit ton of racism, I was out. I was like, one, what's all this extra stuff? And two, come on, bro. Like
right. Oh, I hear you. And we don't have to spend too much time on something like Yosuke, but like I would say Cannon Busters and Yosuke and something like that are, in my opinion, bad. Like not good. I do not enjoy them. I don't like them. Like just trash. But the tricky thing for audiences when there's such narrow opportunities for Black people in a particular space is that we get caught in this situation. It's a catch-22 where like we can't exactly be honest about disliking this thing without feeling or being accused of tearing down the one person in this space who's actually helping pave a way for Black people in anime. So you end up like not wanting to be very honest about your dislike of this work because you're like, ooh, if we take this down and we say that it's trash, then we're not going to get that many more opportunities. And it's, what like you don't want to do that. But then the other side of that, the other lose-lose situation, the other loss is that if we weren't honest about it and we praise this thing that we actually don't like, then you just end up...
We just get more of the shit.
You get more trash that you don't like. So it's a lose-lose situation. And the only way that type of situation is rectified or made better is by having more of us with decision make, like more of us creating things. If there are 100 options of, just to make it a round number, if there are 100 Black people making anime, then you can not like one of them and you're not tearing down the community, because that one person isn't representing the community. You're not tearing down Black anime writers. You're not destroying this whole structure and all the opportunities for the people that would come behind them. You just are disliking this one thing and then celebrating the other 99 things that you do like. And that should be the goal, and that should be the possibility. Like, we should be able to do that rather than having all of our chips on one number, on this one person or this like small number of people, to say like, this is what a Black person writes like in the anime space or in the comic book space or in animation or whatever. Like, we need a broader representation so we can support those things that we love and dislike those things that we dislike, and have those stories represent just how broad and different and dynamic the Black experience is.
So I think I've had like similar conversations, right? Like, I'm getting into the cannabis industry, right? And like all of these people are like, oh my God, it's so great to be the first something, right? Like, you're the first woman or the first Black woman or the first something that's owned something, right? And for me, I think what's important is not when you're like, I'm like the first Black whatever that happens every day, right? Is great. But what interests me is when a market is oversaturated, right? Like, I want there to be so many Black options that we're not surprised, right? Like, the first is monumental, but it's not nearly as monumental to me as the moment where there's too many.
Right, exactly.
For everything.
Yep. I feel the exact same way. Congratulations on your upcoming dispensary, by the way.
Thank you.
Feels so
everything is
good about that.
Switching out of a literary world into just strictly a business world is a very strange experience.
I'm sure it's jarring. There was a question. Actually, we're at 40 minutes, so we might as well start opening this up to questions. You want to do that?
Okay, yeah. So the first question that was asked in the chat is, can you share how writing helped you in your life?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So the main thing, and I'll talk specifically in the context of writing this book. One of the first things that I wrote, the foreword in the book, is about how I didn't intend on writing a memoir. I wanted to write about these topics more from a distance, like from almost an academic tone, explaining what racial coding is, explaining the history of animation, explaining, the trajectory of depictions of people of color in animation from the early days of animation to today, and then hopefully into the future. But it ended up being a memoir, and I'm so glad that it was. The thing that I got from writing this book as a memoir and using myself as the through line to explain all of these concepts, one is that it becomes more relatable to a reader. People only care about academic work or that type of nonfiction so much, but I think that people who read the book, and B can correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine that she's able to connect with these topics a whole lot more, seeing how it affected 8-year-old me or 12-year-old me or 15-year-old me, and like seeing what these things actually meant to a human being, to a person. So there's that, but also it was really cathartic in being able to share things that I normally kept hidden about myself. Most of the stories in this book and most of my childhood are things that even people close to me did not know. Like, I've known B for years. I don't think any of the stories in this book had ever come up. Like, never.
Yeah. This book was a bit of a shock. I've known you for 8 years, and it clarified a lot of things, right? Like, I used to give you shit for not coming back to the Midwest. Like, I was like, why won't you come back, like, home? And you're like, that's not my home anymore. And as soon as you said that, that's all I needed. I was like, oh, okay, cool. This is not for me. It's cool. And I read the book. I was like, hell yeah, I would never fucking go back.
There's so many things. Yeah. There's so many things about me as a person, even as an adult. And like, I'm not Seventh-day Adventist anymore. I don't have the beliefs that I had when I was growing up. Like, all of that stuff has changed. But there's certain things that stick with me, or obviously informed who I am as an adult now, that I were probably mysterious just to anyone who knew. Like, to this day, I've never drank alcohol in my life. Like, I still have not drank. And to most people, that's like a bizarre thing. But then you read the book and you see certain things of how I was raised, and you're like, okay, I can get sort of where that started. And the book was basically a means for me to share the things that I had previously kept hidden from myself, and to be a complete person rather than being the type of person who's effectively navigating in a bubble. A lot of the book is about me going from bubble to bubble and sort of changing, not really changing who I was, but sort of changing who I was to fit the rules of that bubble, to navigate that bubble effectively. So if I was hanging with my kids or with my friends on the street, I was one way in Detroit. If I was hanging with my friends in church, I was another way with another set of rules. If I was hanging with white people in the suburbs, I knew how to be another way, or I had to learn really quick in order to just be able to survive and thrive in that setting. If I was in rural Michigan versus Detroit, I would be different ways. And that is, in one way, a really effective skill to learn. But in another way, it is very fragmenting. It's never feeling comfortable being your true full self and bringing your full self to a setting. And this book was partially, I mean, I had hopefully gotten over most of these things emotionally before writing the book, but this book was sort of an exclamation point to that journey, being like, this is who I am in my entirety. This is the good, the bad, the weird, the traumatic, the celebratory, all of the stuff. Like, my North Star in writing the book was that I would be completely honest about my experience and the things that I did and the things that happened to me, no matter whether I looked good or bad or other people looked good or bad. It was all just like, this is what happened, and this was the honest experience, and this informed who I am today. And it allows me, it feels, it's changed me in a way that I have never felt more whole than after I wrote this book, like being my full self. And that's how writing this book definitely impacted me in a really profound way, I think.
What does it feel like to have a book in the world?
Man, it feels really like this is the proudest I've been of anything. And I imagine this is like a common feeling for any first author. Did you feel this way when Black Queer Hoe came out?
I was terrified.
You were most like, I wasn't even there. To be honest, like there is nothing about the book being out in the world in terms of like its success that scared me. Like, to some degree, I didn't care if the book sold one copy in terms of, or no, change that. I didn't care if I didn't make a single dollar off the book. Like, it wasn't about the money at all, as much as like, this was my experience and I want it to be out in the world. And I want people to be able to see what that experience is like, either to make them feel less alone if they had similar experiences and they feel the same, or if they cannot relate to anything in the book at all, I want them to be able to see what those experiences like, or what those experiences are like for someone who's different than them. Like, I wanted it out there as I wanted a true accounting of something that you rarely, if ever, see in media, in culture, in literature, in books, and TV, which is like a Black nerdy Seventh-day Adventist kid. Like, it's like, it's such I can confidently say, having read a lot of books and a lot of books about people leaving their church or their faith, that there's no book like this. There's no depiction of someone like me. The most notable example of a book similar to this in category is like Educated with Tara Westervelt, which is this white woman who grew up in a very like run for the hills, prepare for the apocalypse, white Mormon faith. And she ended up leaving that and getting her PhD and blah, blah, blah. There's those type of stories. There's stories about people leaving the Church of Latter-day Saints or leaving, all of these different sort of religious structures that they found didn't work for them anymore, and they wanted to leave that space. Like those stories, there's no shortage of those. But there has never, at least to my knowledge, been a story that talks about the intersection of race, religion, and pop culture and sort of ties that into a single experience. And I think that that's an experience, at least some of the feedback, a lot of the feedback that I'm getting from the book is that like people can relate to this. A lot of people can relate to the racial coding part, obviously, but also a lot of people can relate to being raised in a particular faith that made them fear for their soul all the time and made them make certain sexual decisions that were traumatizing or destructive, or made them feel certain levels of anxiety and also joy. And like it's a very, very complicated experience that I wanted to lay out there for people to be able to see. So like above anything else, I'm proud that this book is successful in being an honest telling of that story. Like the honesty was my North Star. There are times in the book where other people might come off great or they might come off terrible. There are times in the book where I might come off great or I might come off terrible. And I was just going to be like, no matter how I look, no matter how anyone else looks, like I'm just going to tell things as they happened, like as I observed them or as I felt them or as I thought of them when I was that age. And the judgment can be up to the reader. Like the judgment can be up to you. Like be reading a certain character and being like, oh, I empathize with his mom, or oh, his mom was, made terrible decisions, or oh, I empathize with Jordan or his brother or this kid or this friend or whatever. And it would be up to you to decide whether those things are great or terrible or happy or sad or normal or not normal or whatever. I tried to take my own judgment out of the book to the extent possible. My biggest question when I finished the book to most people who read it was like, how did so-and-so come across? How did this character come across? Because I don't know how a lot of the characters come across, because I didn't want to add any of my own adult value judgments to those characters. I wrote the book from the perspective of whatever age I was at the time. So if I'm 8 years old in the book, I'm writing it to the knowledge of an 8-year-old. If I'm 15 in the book, I'm writing it to the knowledge and understanding of a 15-year-old. But I'm not saying that like this person was a bad person or this person was a good person. All of that is up to the reader. And I'm curious for you as a reader who's obviously finished the book. Like there are certain characters or certain people in the book. Certain ones of them, like, certain ones of them are obviously like you're not gonna like them, and I can understand that much. But like, did you feel for, without giving too many spoilers, I guess there's one setting where a kid does something that is pretty racist and shitty, and felt really, really bad about it, and ended up confessing about it. Did you feel bad for him?
I didn't feel bad for him, but I also didn't hate him. Cause I don't know. There was a lot that I identified with in the book, having started off at like a very, very black elementary school, and then like 6th grade, I like suddenly switched and I was like outnumbered, and learning how to find friends with people who said and did like, that's not for me. Like I passed by so many jokes. I gave so many passes. I did so much to survive that I have those skeletons in my closet, some that I've written about, some that I haven't. It's like, no, I didn't feel bad for you, because like one with that particular story, he like drug that shit out. Like you could have got that over with. But I also didn't hate him because, I have fond memories with people who have done really terrible shit to me, whether malicious or not, right? Like, because sometimes kids just are mean and don't even realize the extent of how mean it is, because they have no act like he felt bad because it became so large, but he has no actual understanding and empathy for what that experience is like, right? Like, and so I don't know, like it's a survival thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad I left that up to the reader. I'm glad that I was
do
able to
have two
write my
more
experience.
questions.
Okay, 2 more questions. Perfect.
You do have two more questions. One is, why did you leave the church?
Oh man, phew. That's a deep one. That's probably one that's sort of best answered by reading the book. Like when you read the book, you see what my experience was like in the church, then it would probably be sort of like how B described, like, oh, okay, this all makes sense now. So to get the more thorough answer, please read the book. I think you'll love it. I think you'll enjoy it. But to give you the quick, short answer is that I didn't find that belief system served me. I didn't find that belief system was one that was healthy for me, one that helped me be my best self. And I guess the medium-ish answer is that, and it's sort of a philosophical answer, is that I don't think that you have much control over what you believe. I think you believe something or you don't, and you can try to believe. I could try to believe in something if I wanted to. That doesn't mean that I actually believe in it. I think belief is inherent. So I couldn't explain why I do or don't believe in God any more than I can explain, like,
No, I think that's a clear answer. Like that's actually a really, really great answer, especially for somebody who was raised. I spent Y2K in church because it was the end of the world. That was a very exciting period in my life. There's another really great question. What current show or movie do you wish you had as a child?
Oh man, that's a great question. Man, there's quite a few. One of them that Keith mentioned earlier was something like Craig of the Creek, which just shows Black kids being Black kids without any type of struggle narrative. Like they're just being joyful, happy kids without having to overcome racism or overcome how people are treating them. Like in the 80s and 90s, just to go back to that transition period in animation and in pop culture, if there was a Black coded character and if there was an explicit Black journey, usually it was one of overcoming racism. Like usually if it was like there is a struggle of oppression and you have to beat it, you have to overcome it. And now we see people having a lot of fatigue for those type of stories. If ever there's like a new, story about overcoming racism, people are just like, okay, like,
is the villain a drug dealer?
Yeah, like
guessed.
not enough of that. There's nothing inherently wrong with that story, but when you put it in the larger context of the culture and the stories that we've been fed for so many years, it's like, give us something else. Just give us people who are dealing with real human, normal, like challenges beyond that, or people who are just thriving or live. Like I will feel that representation is in a new place when we have a bunch of Black people with shows as dumb as Emily in Paris. Like, let us be able to be out there with like no actual purpose or challenge, to be that dumb and vapid. And that, like, when you can have that out there, then you know that there's like a ton of options. That's because that's scraping the bottom of the barrel. There needs to be enough where some of them end up that bad, and that's okay. Welcome to the party.
I kind of think that's the encapsulation.
So, most importantly, buy the book.
Yes. I have to say, Jordan, I grew up Southern Baptist in Savannah, Georgia.
Ooh,
And I went to college right next to a train track, and had a very Southern Baptist roommate. And every time the train would go by in the middle of the night and there was blaring horns, I would think, oh my God, the resurrection is coming.
It's time. It is
And
time.
I don't believe this.
Man, I grew up with such a
everything
perpetual fear. I grew up with such a perpetual fear of
Yeah.
either the second coming of Christ happening and not being ready, or dying shortly after a sin without having a chance to repent and forgive.
Right. Yeah, it is real. And when you finally realize, like, it's okay if I don't believe, and you know, I have a kid who my family's like, are you really raising him in the church? I'm like, no, I'm raising him with morality. That's more important to me.
Yeah.
So,
In that
anyway,
way,
we could go on.
It's hard. That's
Yeah.
hard in the sense of, in some ways, having the Bible as a framework for ethics and morality is sort of easy because it gives you a playbook. You can just try to live by. Of course, everyone is interpreting the Bible, so you're still doing that type of work. But it at least like gives you something as a crutch to rely on. Whereas without that framework, you have to put a lot of thought and effort into what you're teaching your kid is moral and ethical.
Right.
And you have to be able to substantiate it, to be able to live by it in some way, you have to put so much intellectual work into that in a way that, at least speaking for myself, I didn't have to put in until I took myself out of the framework of the Bible and Christianity. Like the amount of thought and effort that I put into deciding what is right and what is wrong and how I want the world to be or how I want my own behavior to be is very different now than when I was just thinking like, well, what did the Bible say in this commandment, or what did Jesus say in this verse? And that's it's hard work, but I think it's really, really meaningful work, and it's the work that anyone who's had a similar experience to the type that I had in this book, sort of eventually leaving the church or evolving my faith, like that. That experience is one that's powerful and meaningful, and hopefully one that folk here want to read.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this whole conversation has been fascinating. Just like, I have a tattoo that I wish I didn't have. So, so anyway, we can keep
I have
going.
that fear. I need to get over that fear because it's like it's fine. It's fine. It's not the end of the world.
I have a toe ring tattooed on my foot. So,
that's fine.
That is something that you can easily turn into like something else.
You're good. You are good.
It's so faded, it looks like I drew on myself in Crayola marker. So it doesn't really matter. Anyway, it was from 20 years ago. Anyway, this has been so much fun. Again, the book you can purchase by going on our website, clicking that buy the book button. We also have Britteney's book. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I hope you have a good night. Stay cool. In both senses of the word, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, B, as well, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Thank you.